Hello, everybody. This is Liam, and I am here with Dave from Boldr Impact, which is really an interesting story when it applies to BPOs. Everyone that's listening to this podcast knows that I have a soft spot in my heart for business process outsourcing companies. They are the unsung heroes of remote work, and I'm so excited to be able to jump into how you started the company and how you're very, very different from your average BPO. So Dave, thanks for coming on.
No worries, Liam. And I prefer David if that's okay, but I'm really excited to connect. Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Well, you've been my third David of today, which is why, so I'll just switch to Dave. We were talking about that before we started.
No, it's great. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Boldr, what is it? Let me know.
Cool. So I'll just give a little snapshot on who I am as well. I spent most of my 20s living in the Philippines, set up my first outsourcing company. 3 years into that business, my best friend and co-founder unfortunately passed away. And I was 26 at the time. And when he passed, it forced me to really look at what I was doing in my life and the way I was operating a business and really rethink everything. I feel like I was having a midlife crisis, to say the least. It forced me to really just rethink how I was operating. And I realized through that process of grief that a lot of my core values weren't actually being followed, and I wasn't living a life that I was most likely proud of, and frankly I wasn't living a life that I was proud of at all. And so I really wanted to build a company that would serve the community and serve our team members instead of exploiting them, which is something that not a lot of BPOs do, but some in the Philippines have. There's some recorded history of that, and We're seeing some news about that in the last year in Africa. And so we really wanted to set out to kind of challenge some of the nature of the industry in the Philippines, and this was in 2016, 2017. So we launched Boldr. We've always been a mission-driven business, and fortunately I've always become a public benefit corporation as well as a proud B Corp. And we exist to help team members in our communities thrive. And so we really look forward to investing in the communities that we operate in, and then also serving our team members so they can have a career with us and not just a job. And I'm happy to go through more of that, but that's the spiel. We're in the Philippines. Go for it.
For those that don't know, what is a B Corp?
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a fun question. So B Corp is a public benefit corporation. Is basically, there's two different groups, a public benefit corporation and a B Corp. Okay. A public benefit corporation is a actual amendment to your articles of incorporation, a amendment to your bylaws, which actually says that you exist as a company to serve more than just your shareholders, and you exist to serve the environment, you exist to serve the local communities, and you actually get to define how you exist to serve more than just your shareholders' interests, which is really near and dear to our heart because we are an employee-owned business as well. A B Corp is a certification process that companies go through. There's about, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 B Corps all around the world, and it basically is an auditing process to audit whether or not your internal practices ensure that you are living the values that you say you are. And it's not a perfect system, but right now it's the only auditing process that exists today to say whether or not companies are operating in an ethical way.
Got it. Wow, interesting. And so with a B Corp, is there any kind of profit distribution that goes back to, is there any type of very specific structuring that you have to be able to go through, or is there an auditing body that you have to work through?
Yeah, so B Corp is in itself the auditing body that will verify you, and basically it's a point system. And so if you are, an employee-owned company and you have an ESOP that grants out profit to your employees, it'll give you a higher rating or points than if you are a single member LLC and you're taking all of the profit. So they designed it basically to really look at equality for the team members and the people working in the business.
Very cool. All right. So, that's a crazy story. Your business partner passes away at 26. You're not really excited about where you're going directionally in life. How does someone actually recognize that? Like, did you just sit down and say, oh shit, I'm, like, am I really proud of myself, right? No one actually has the self-awareness to be like, oh, maybe I'm being kind of a dick here, or maybe I'm not too proud of myself. Well, could you bring us back to that moment? Like, was there a particular straw that broke this camel's back for you?
Yeah, Liam, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think for me, it was more of just like deep reflection. And I was like going through the process of grief. I was just a huge, kind of frankly, a raging asshole. I was drinking too much. I was smoking too much weed just to kind of like pretend and bury the fact that I was grieving the loss of my best friend and business partner. I was doing everything I could to just pretend that I was okay, and the reality was that I wasn't. And I think, one of my teachers and mentors really likes to say that crisis precedes transformation every time. And in my lowest of lows, I basically had a really low experience where I was like, what am I doing? And then I realized through process of healing and, working with grief counselors and also just therapists in general, which I'm a huge advocate of as well, like how broken I was. And when I realized it was because my values, my internal value system wasn't aligned to how I was acting and showing up in the world. And so when those are misaligned, I think there's a lot of opportunity to, question what you could be doing differently and question how you should be showing up. And so spent a lot of time and energy to understand that through self-reflection and meditation. So, yeah.
So how did you realign? Do you have an internal mission, or is the company's mission your own internal mission?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most beautiful things about being an entrepreneur and founder is that we get to shape a lot of our own ideals and values into our companies. My mission statement is a little bit more broader than our company's, and my values are a little different. One of my key core values is mobility and the ability to really embrace that mobility mindset, as well as, and it dovetails nicely off of freedom, and we can talk about that because I'm really curious to see how that links into a remote mindset. But yeah, they are different, and I think it's important to have a little bit of a difference, but they are on the same path, and so they're supporting each other.
Okay. Yeah, no, so I don't know if you know EOS, Entrepreneur Operating System.
Yeah, 100%.
But inside of it, there's this document called the Vision Traction Organizer, which is the core document that every company should have: your mission, your values, what you stand for. And I recognized that we had been building a VTO for our companies for years, but I had never actually built a VTO for myself. And once I actually built a Vision Traction Organizer for myself, I was able to identify my own personal vision and then build traction directly towards that target, which allowed me to become, as you said, a little bit less of an asshole, which is the world can definitely use a lot less assholes in the world. And sometimes you actually have to recognize that you are the asshole, and that's the first step to undoing it. Or what a buddy of mine loves to call, and again, this is totally going to get an explicit rating for the podcast, but the concept of fuckbergs. Have you ever heard of this concept before?
No, tell me about it.
It's like an iceberg, but it's a fuckberg. So people inside of your organization that are fuckbergs, there's a little bit of data on the top end that shows like, oh, maybe this person isn't really aligned to the culture and the values of the company. But when you investigate more, you recognize that was just the 10% that you could see above the surface. Underneath, 90% is a big fat fuckberg, and your company is the Titanic, and you're running right into it, and you need to be able to make a course correction as quickly as possible. And identifying fuckbergs in your company and in yourself is absolutely critical to having a successful company and then also company culture, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally. And I think identifying those fuckbergs, excuse me, that feels wrong to say, but actually kind of good to say it as well, is really hard. And I think when you do identify them, though, it's blatantly obvious because you can kind of see the reaction from the people around them. It's almost like they take a deep breath and they're like, oh, we can move forward. And so I've noticed that.
There is a very easy way to detect a fuckberg. And you give everyone an anonymous survey and you ask them just two questions. Who is the unsung hero in your department, and who is the asshole? Ask those two questions. You will very easily be able to define your fuckbergs, and then you just get rid of your fuckbergs as quickly as possible. And they, by the way, are the hardest people to get rid of, because usually a fuckberg is a really high performer from a technical perspective, but they actually don't have the emotional trust of other team members inside of the organization. And that's the piece that it's so difficult to be able to let those people go, but once you do, everyone just has that relief, which is fantastic. So let's get back to Boldr. Hopefully you don't have any fuckbergs in your company, and it sounds like you were a bit of a fuckberg yourself, but you kind of just made your own personal corrections on that side. So once you had this realization where you're like, all right, I want to be able to change myself around, and I want to be able to build. Boldr was already built at that point, right?
No, it was a separate business, and so reset up something new. Yeah.
Okay, so we're building Boldr. How are you approaching that from a perspective for yourself? What did you have a particular mission in mind? Was there a goal for the organization?
Yeah. And definitely, I think I was just while you were talking, I was thinking about it, and I totally was the fuckberg in the first business that I was building. And I think the reason why was because I was operating in this like me, myself, and I environment. Like life is happening to me, and I am either a victim, or I am in like the hero and trying to control the situation. And so one of the things that we did differently when we were forming Boldr was trying to remove myself as much as possible. And I think one of the things that I was most proud of was when we just started out, we were only 20 team members in one really like not so great office in the Philippines. And we brought everyone together, and we asked that simple question, like, okay, this is the vague 30,000 feet up ideas that we want to help people in their communities. How are we going to do that? And so we let everyone kind of go through this co-creating process together to decide who are we going to support, which ended up being individual like the youth in the Philippines, but then also identifying how are we going to sponsor sporting events, are we going to sponsor this, and then we came into our mission of really wanting to serve people through an educational process and getting kids off the street and back into the schools. And so that could have only been created through the process of that co-creation with the team. And it was only by inviting them in that we got there. And I think one of the things is that sometimes, I used to think that I had all the answers, but then I realized that I was way more effective, and also like the best ideas come from this like dialogue that we have with the people around us. So that was the biggest process where we got to understand our mission, but then we also did that with our core values as well. And I think what was really helpful was that at Boldr, yes, we invite the input of our team when we're building our core values, but then I always had the opportunity to challenge and frankly have a little bit of veto power, because one of the most core values that's near and dear to my heart is the idea of being authentic and embracing authenticity in our company. And that wasn't really a popular core value when we were going and starting out, but it was something that I was yearning to have in our office and yearning to have with the team when we build. And so I kept that one in, irrespective of the fact that it wasn't necessarily the most popular one. So I do think as a founder, when inviting the team into a co-creative process, always realize that you can, at the end of the day, have a little bit of veto power.
Right. No, and absolutely important, because this is what you built. So you don't want to be in something that all of a sudden you kind of look around and think to yourself, oof, I don't really like it here, even though I helped build it, or I was the founder of it. So yeah, that's a really good perspective. You said you started with 20 people. How far back was that?
Yeah, so we launched in, my best friend passed away in October of 2016. And then we launched in February of 2017 with 20 team members. And yeah, today, fast forwarding six or so-ish years, 6-7 years, we have about close to 1,500 team members in the Philippines, which is still our largest market, but we're also proudly in Mexico, South Africa, and Canada. And we grew in those markets with, one, our clients' desires. Our clients really wanted us to be around the world and serving them in different geographies. But also we looked at two other important factors. One was, how can we serve the communities in which we expand into? So South Africa, there's a 30% unemployment rate in Cape Town specifically, but in rural South Africa, the unemployment rate is actually closer to 60 to 70%, where we're consciously investing our funds and resources to creating access to, to the digital environment and the digital employment sector. So we're really excited to be serving the community there. But then also for our team members is that we've realized that where BPOs commonly work are in developing countries, and these developing countries have huge visa restrictions for travel and for the ability to move or relocate from the Philippines to Canada or the US. And so we wanted to work in environments that were able to serve our team members' desires for travel and potentially even relocation and immigration into these different markets. So that was a huge component of it as well.
Yeah, that is a massive challenge. We actually just completed our company team retreat about 2 weeks ago, and
Nice.
we were flying everyone into Dubai, but we had, out of 35 countries, 4 countries were not able to get the visa requirements that they needed
No
to
way.
be able to come into the country, which is so frustrating when you have the reality of, when you're at 35 countries, there almost is no single place on planet Earth that everyone accepts equally from an
Yep.
immigration perspective. And it's one of those things that if you come at that problem from a Western perspective,
Yep.
where I have a Canadian passport, I can just
Yep.
walk into anywhere and
Yep.
I can
A place
be
of
let
privilege.
in.
Yeah.
Right. But if you're in the Philippines, you have to have a visa application for almost every single country that you apply to, and that process is very long and frustrating.
Yeah, and you have to have your flights booked, your hotels booked, and documentation to go into the visa process without even like a confirmation of whether or not you're going to get it. And so it's this ironic, like kind of cat and mouse game where you have to procure your flights and all of these expenses even before you get your visa. And it's just it's a really I think a conversation that isn't discussed enough in the remote world, and specifically in the digital nomad community, because it's so hard for team members in South Africa to travel as well, and these archaic systems are really limiting remote work, in my opinion, or this digital nomad lifestyle is kind of, I think, really self-serving to a lot of more privileged societies, and not necessarily exploring how we could be supporting people from these developing economies that get overlooked. And so that's just my point there. But yeah,
What's your perspective on that future? Because if we really are seeing a reality, there are some people that say there'll be 1 billion digital nomads in the next 2 to 3 years, but I actually think they don't really understand the biggest thing that you have to overcome is thinking in that Western mindset, which is, the reality is that if you're in Nigeria, you ain't going nowhere, right? Like the reality is that, like, to be able to actually deploy easy access to different countries, it's, if you are a citizen of a developing country, your passport is nowhere near as valuable as other team members. Do you see any theoretical fix for that?
No, unfortunately, I think yes, for more developed societies where you can have easy access, removing visa restrictions, the digital nomad visa that allows you to work in these countries where they're just really happy to tax you and when you live there. But for team members in the Philippines, maybe what I do see is if we can include the mass migration out of the cities, so out of Metro Manila, where there's 30 odd million people working and living there, back to the provincial areas where they're born and raised and where a lot of their families live. I think that reverse migration is going to happen, and if we include that in that billion, then maybe we'll get close to there, because I could see that happening in Cape Town as well. and a lot of other markets in Mexico as well. So yeah, maybe if we look at it in country and people moving back out of the cities and into their provincial towns where infrastructure isn't necessarily as good to support a digital nomad lifestyle or a remote lifestyle, because there aren't co-working centers in a lot of the places in provincial areas, or not necessarily enough that support 24/7 connectivity. Right. But yeah, anyways, so I see that as maybe as a little bit more of an outlook on remote work.
Story for another podcast, unfortunately, but the reality is I had back in 2017, 2016, I had a very interesting problem where we were actually trying to deploy a WeMax station inside of one of the toughest ghettos in Manila. So we wanted to basically give like 10,000 people free access to the internet. And we bought the top tier line that we could from the 2 internet providers in Manila.
PLDT.
And we were going to do and we were going to launch it. And then all of a sudden the government actually shut us down because they didn't want to be able to give people free internet, which to me sounded absolutely ridiculous. But again,
and even Starlink and and even with like Starlink now in the Philippines, you have to actually obtain a permit to be able to operate your Starlink machine. You have to apply for it through the government as an individual, which doesn't seem easy either. But yeah, totally a podcast for another day.
Yeah. So let's go back to Boldr.
Cool.
20 to 1,500 people. What's the operating model? Like, are you guys mostly in offices? Is it service-based outsourcing? Is it staff leasing? Are you specializing in a particular industry?
Yeah, thanks for asking the question. So I like to be as broad and vague as possible by saying we help companies build their global teams.
Okay.
And we do that in 2 ways. One is, a traditional like managed outsource solution where we'll hire people on behalf of our clients who are managed against the KPIs that we define in partnership with our clients. And this works for companies who are growing really fast and really aiming for scale and achieving that scale, and they need a team of like dedicated team members to jump in and support. So we do that. We partner with a lot of e-commerce and SaaS-based companies, predominantly in the U.S., although we are seeing an exciting amount of UK businesses being really excited about our mission focus. So that's the one service offering that we do, is a traditional managed outsource solution. And then we recently launched our EOR offering. And what we looked at was we were looking at our business and we thought, okay, what do we do really well? Any outsourcing company will be able to manage team members against KPIs, but what we believe we do well and where we think we've cracked the nut and are continuing to focus our time and energy on is the team member experience, which improves retention and improves performance and productivity because of our mission focus and because of our ability, our unique brand positioning in the market. People are actually reaching out to us to work at Boldr, and what we realize is that we can look at our support infrastructure as a company and offer connecting talent to companies directly. So removing a managed outsource solution, but connecting a great team member in Cape Town, an engineer, to work with one of our clients because they have a job opening for that and they are amenable to hiring globally. So that's our EOR service offering that we've launched. As far as our team, pre-COVID, we were, I'd say like 95% in office, Monday through Friday. I just recently pulled the statistics on this, and we're down to like a half to a third in each market, and it differs for markets. The Philippines being the most contrasting to where we were pre-pandemic, where the majority of our workforce is working from home or in a hybrid setting. So we noticed that shift, and we're seeing that as the biggest contrast. Where in Mexico, a lot of our team members are actually still coming into the office voluntarily. It's been something that they've really enjoyed around the community aspect of our office in Merida specifically. And then Cape Town, there's a reduction of around 50% of our team working from home and or in hybrid situations.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, I think you just cracked the top rule of remote, hybrid, or in-office work, which is autonomy, allowing people the choice to be able to work the way that they want to work, which is definitely going to create a much better working environment for everybody.
Yeah, and it's really hard, Liam, because there's some clients that we work with that, have certain security requirements that are forcing us to either have them in office or, in office, period. And what we're struggling with internally is, why is it that this team gets to work, in this hybrid environment, whereas I have to report to the office every day, and it's not fair. And frankly, like, we're still figuring that out. So yes, we have a level of autonomy in which our team, shows up in a hybrid environment. But it's a big question, and it's something that we haven't figured out completely.
So going from 20 to 1,500, and did a lot of your growth happening during COVID, or was it pretty kind of step up the entire way? Like, did you have like an arc point, like just an exponential hockey stick moment inside of your growth somewhere?
Yeah, we had two of those. One was in 2018, where the business quadrupled, and then again, from 50 to 100 team members to 300, and then again, right after the pandemic, we saw initial contraction. We lost about 30% of our client contracts just shut down because of what happened with COVID, and then 3 to 6 months later, a surge, predominantly in our e-commerce businesses, where a lot of e-commerce was just on fire. So we actually exploded again then because of that in late 2019, early 2020.
And any minimum buy-on that people need to do? Like, do you start with one rep inside of Boldr, or is there a minimum?
Yeah, no, we don't necessarily operate with minimums, because we also have this flexible solution, which I don't need to get too into, but right. We really recommend companies that are looking to work with a BPO or any sort of staffing agency to really, it needs to be a little bit bigger than one person. So at least 2 team members, and right. The willingness to invest in hiring for a manager is really important. Otherwise, there's so many great marketplaces to find these contractual hourly rates. Upwork. You can go to Upwork for when and if you're looking for less than that, and that might be a more sustainable and affordable solution for you.
So, out of these 2 big jumps that you had, what would you say is the magic? Because I got to tell you, I talked to a lot of BPOs. Once you hit the 1,000+ seat mark, that's really a magical. I actually see there's like 3 or 4 magical moments. The first one for BPO is the Dunbar number, which is 150 people, which is the maximum amount of people that that you can know personally. So once you bypass that number, you actually have to evolve your organization in a pretty significant way. And a lot of BPOs, they kind of they hit the 100 to 200 mark, but they kind of bounce back because they haven't really understood that. Yep. So the next one is 1,000 people, which you've cracked through in record time. And then the next one that I really see is the 5,000 mark. Once you're at 5,000, you're really kind of like a large scale organization. Your processes are locked in. You're ready to just kind of, the difference between 5,000 and 50,000, there almost is no difference. So how did you get to that? I mean, a lot of people really want to kind of figure that out for themselves, because they're probably listening right now and thinking to themselves, man, I want a 1,500 seat organization.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot in that question. So I'll try to answer it as best as I can. That Dunbar number is something we thought a lot about, and if I could have done it sooner, I would have investing in our new markets and been able to open those up with a little bit more time and space to be able to really embrace our culture from the start. We had to divert a lot of attention and energy to expand into these new markets to keep our team size at a more sustainable number. So and we also have 2 offices in the Philippines, one in Tacloban, which is is close to Samar and Leyte in southern Philippines, which is a great environment for us, and we're really excited to be continuing to expand in Tacloban because Manila is so saturated with thousands of BPOs, right? And it's hard to really differentiate ourselves and our culture there. But really focusing on expanding into these new markets and really leaning into our culture, our values. I think when companies like us expand really quickly, you get stretch marks. Like you can't help it. And these stretch marks, can etch into permanent tattoos, or you can really lean into embracing them and fixing them, or fixing some of the things that went wrong. So some of our biggest challenges were the fact that we hired leaders who weren't necessarily middle management and leaders in market that weren't necessarily truly in line with our culture and our values. So we went through not necessarily a fuckberg kind of elimination process, but really just a thoughtful inquiry as to who's living our values, who's living our culture, and then a ruthless process of prioritizing people who are living our values and really investing in their development and their career at Boldr. So I would say focusing on culture and your mission is really important. And I really would suggest to anybody who's trying to figure out how to crack that nut is to really think about how are they different? What differentiates your business or you in the sea of BPOs? Because there are 1,500 operating in Metro Manila, and thousands in the country. And so I think about that question quite a lot, and really leaning into your employer branding and your employee focus there.
And that's what you believe is your magic sauce is. You've got a unique culture. If you want to come and work at Boldr, you've got to be a particular type of person. I love that as a concept, because I actually tell our team all the time, we need to be able to figure out why people would not work here as opposed to why people would work here. And when you think about it in the reverse, it's actually a really good way to say, I had a story where there were 3 VPs of sales that got to me back in 2019, and I was doing interviews with them. And about an hour and a half into the interview with this VP of sales guy, he kind of just said, I don't really think remote work works. And I was like, oh, tell me more. And he kind of went into this 10-minute diatribe about how he just doesn't think that salespeople can work remotely, and it's not for sales teams.
Yeah.
And I said, amazing. Thank you so much for telling me. You are absolutely not qualified to work here, because our mission is we're trying to empower the world's transition towards remote work. And if you don't believe that, then you shouldn't work here in the first place. It's so good to be able to very clearly identify who shouldn't be part of the organization as opposed to who should be. And if you've got that, that's magic.
Yeah, and I would love to, if we do have time, to really explore that concept, because I actually don't necessarily know, and I'd be curious to see organizations that set up themselves to thrive in a remote world for entry-level jobs. Because I think if you're right out of college, or if it's your first time, working in this environment, I'm not sure if remote work is the best place for you to thrive. I think you need visible leadership, and I like people who have made, quote unquote, made it, and have those visible leaders available. And I think too often, in a remote environment, we do get siloed, and so there's a lot of conscious effort that's required. And I don't know if a lot of businesses are set up to make that investment, to be more conscious, and including these team members who it's their first job, and giving them the exposure that they normally get in an office. And I'm not saying that it's definite no. It's just something that we're curious about. But I think going back to your last conversation, the 1,000 to 5,000, Liam, we see that we see that as a big number, and it's actually a number that we're aiming towards in the next 5 to 10 years. But we've intentionally slowed down our growth. We put the brakes on expanding into new client contracts, mostly because of the fact that I think when companies do grow too fast, and I think we might have in the first 5 to 6 years of our journey, it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable for a company's culture, and it's not sustainable to really making sure that you're living your values every day. And so this last year, we went through a radical shift in strategy from a growth at all cost strategy to one of sustained impact. And so we're okay with the process of getting to 5,000 team members taking as long as it needs to ensure that our values and our purpose and our mission and our focus on communities stay central. And I think, and that's just the biggest thing, because then, you make a couple mistakes, and then all of a sudden you have assholes running your company. So
fuckbergs, man, you got to control for those fuckbergs. That is such a counterintuitive piece of advice. And one of my questions that I had for you was, what's one piece of counterintuitive advice that you would give to other BPO founders? And it sounds like this is it, which is growing slower, making the active choice to grow slower may actually accelerate your growth in the long term, right? And it's one of those pieces that it's like not many BPO founders get that.
Yeah, and I think it's, I'll reflect on what one of my mentors and teachers would be like: optimizing for what you want. Like we don't want to sell this business to private equity. We don't want to get acquired by one of the like big, large outsourcing companies. We want to build this company to exist and continue to serving the communities and change the outsourcing industry. And so, if an outsourcing CEO is like, or a founder wants to sell this business, or have a private equity group acquire them and grow as fast as you can, like that's what they want to see. Like and so optimizing for what it is you want, like just because what I'm saying it's what we want and it's what we spent a lot of time and energy really understanding, but it's going to be different for everybody. Right. So like whilst like that's my point of view, others will have a different one, and that's totally okay.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let me end this with a couple quick fire questions, and don't worry, they're not scary. They're just the first thing that pop into your head. First question I've got for you: what's the biggest mistake you made in your business?
I've made so many.
First one that pops into your head, because that's usually the one that's really important. Maybe it's the one that it popped into your head and you're like, oh, I can't share that one. That's the one that you should share.
Yeah, but so I'll share it in a theme. Making a decision too fast without being able to really understand the implications or the hidden unintended consequences of that decision. It's been something where as a founder I'm so eager to just like grab and go and pick that, make a move, but take a few minutes, pause, ask questions, and really making sure that that's the right decision is I wish I do that more often, and I wish I've done that more often. So that's the biggest one.
What's the biggest thing stopping you from getting to the next level in your business?
Myself, I would say. I think Warren Rustand, this great entrepreneur and leader, really loves to say that no matter how fast your business is growing, the founder or CEO needs to be growing faster. And I'm always worried that I'm not growing more personally and professionally at the level that I need to in order to continue building this business that I want to.
How do you feel you're trying to solve for that now?
Yeah, I've got a great therapist, Sherry Walling. Props to you. She's amazing. She's also a great coach. But I invest in a number of coaches supporting me in the business, a lot of different consultants. I think that's the first step, is recognizing your own limitations and being hungry and motivated to finding other people that have other ideas or viewpoints and want to help. So, yeah.
You might have already answered this, but what do you think the BPO industry needs to do differently?
Honestly, like not serving the interest of shareholders who are investors that are not necessarily too motivated to understand why you should invest in a community outside of the major cities. I think there's a lot of shareholder interest in our industry, which is the reasons why exploitation and marginalization of team members exists. I'm not saying all companies do that, but I think too often it's a common story and it's an old story. So I think that's what the industry needs, is more bespoke, smaller firms that are really excited to live their mission and do outsourcing their way.
Right. Not just to be big, but to be good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And sometimes those two things are not actually connected, which I completely agree with. The BPO industry has the highest attrition rate of almost any industry. The only other industry that has a higher attrition rate is retail sales.
Yep.
How do you retain and engage your talent? What's your differentiator for that space? Because it is the real key to locking up a very successful BPO in the long term.
Yeah, it's a huge problem in our industry, and I think also Yeah, it's a big one, and there's a lot of different talking points, but I think that's also why we've intentionally slowed down growth to really focus on our culture, our mission, and our values. Because when you are growing that fast, it's really hard to focus on your team members. And it's really differentiating your team member experience and really nailing down, why do team members come to work at Boldr? Why don't they? And really understanding the persona of the individual and really treating them well and treating them with respect. There's a lot of things that we need to do better around communication and making sure that all team members are included in the communications of our business and sharing them. And I think that's a big challenge for companies moving from an in-office culture to a hybrid or asynchronous work environment. That's one of the things that we're still struggling with, and it's the common theme that we hear from our team members is they wish they had more visibility and understanding of what's happening in the company from a more macro perspective. So I think, trying to answer it in two different ways.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Just in terms of people knowing what is happening inside of the business is so critical to them staying inside of that business, at least in my opinion. Yeah. That's so cool. Last question that I'll leave you with. The future of work as it applies to the BPO industry. What's your perspective? Where do you think the BPO industry will be in the next 2 to 3 years? And maybe I'm actually going to ask this in a two-part question. Where do you think it's going to be in 2 to 3 years from an aspirational perspective, meaning David's perspective on where it should be? And then where do you think it's going to be pragmatically in the next 2 to 3 years? And maybe those are different. Maybe that's the same.
Yeah. Aspirationally, I would love to see more BPOs and outsourcing companies realize that their differentiator is connecting incredible talent to opportunity. To opportunity that didn't previously exist in those markets. And so what I mean by that is moving out of these mega cities where there's 20 or 30 million people living and moving into more rural environments where infrastructure is a challenge, government support is a challenge, and the education and training is a challenge, and making those conscious investments in areas where it's really, really hard to set up. I think is what aspirationally I would love to see is more of an impact sourcing mindset, more of an ideal of serving communities instead of extracting from them. And so that'd be the biggest one. Pragmatically, I get really curious about how AI and these technologies are going to reshape our industry. I don't necessarily seeing it being like a dinosaur level extinction event. I do see us, maybe not necessarily growing as fast, outsourcing industry growing as fast as it's reported to over the next 2 to 3 years because of companies choosing to invest in alternatives to hiring talent. So I just think a little bit of a slowdown in the market is evident and something that I think most BPOs might see. And I do see impact sourcing pragmatically making sense. It's a great differentiator. Clients love it, but it's a hard nut to crack. So the movement and adoption of an impact sourcing mindset might take a lot longer than 2 to 3 years.
Well, hopefully we can check in 2 to 3 years and see how you're doing. I'm sure you'll be at like 20,000 seats by that point. For anyone that's interested in learning a little bit more about Boldr, where should we send them?
Yeah, definitely check us out online, boldrimpact.com, without the E, BOLDR. And then if you're interested in any of the conversations or talking points that I brought up today, hit me up on LinkedIn. It's the most active social media platform that I'm on. I'm not on Twitter, nor am I on other platforms. So LinkedIn is the easiest way to get a hold of me.
No TikTok, huh?
No, not yet, but hopefully never.
All right. Well, that's David. BoldrImpact.com. That's the website. If you're interested in checking it out, again, we'll have that all down in the show notes. Go check that out. It has been such a pleasure chatting with you. And I hope to see where you're going to develop over the next couple of years, because I think you have such a unique perspective of approaching the BPO industry, which was so interesting for me to hear your perspective on.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. And to those who I offended, please reach out as well, because I'd love to exchange and have some dialogue around it. But thank you, Liam, for having me. It's been a true pleasure.
Yeah, and for people that I offended, I offended you. I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. See y'all later. Bye.